I know over the years we've had many conversations regarding Montauk, and there's a certain element that I've brought in. I mean, I brought in a few different things that most other people don't talk about, and that's coming in from my perspective and things that I recall, and also that some other pieces of evidence that comes up that reminds me that this is all still connected. And so I created this video not long ago, a couple of years back, about Montauk and also talked about how it links to Plum Island as well as Coney Island. But today, we've had different people that have done sessions with us that have had a connection to these surfers. When I saw that the surfers were transients or surfers that travel, they go from one beach to the next beach. And, some of my clients there, even their kids have surfed in Montauk. It's one of those places what people go to. So, a place that is operating with experiments, and there's a need for subjects. That what happens is that those kids that didn't have enough money but love to surf, maybe he sometimes gets stuck at some of these different beaches and hang out and, you know, uh, we'll say couch surf as well because, they're trying to just stick around and still ride the waves. But, there's a need for money is there's a need for other things. And so what happens is while they're on Montauk and probably in other locations as well, they get pulled in. They get pulled into the drug scene, they get pulled into whatever it is that they need to make money, but also, um, hey, a group that is offering money for an experiment and you just have to be there and they'll give you money, would be appealing. Only it's something that we wouldn't really hear about because it would probably go underground. So my many visions of seeing and watching this experience, I started questioning. It's like at one point I saw that the surfers literally would figure out how to do their jump, their time travel jump, literally like riding the waves. And so a bunch of them ended up in the video that I displayed a while back. I literally show how I saw some of them broke away. They got away from the experiments in the MyLabs that are deeper underground and figured out a way to end up somewhere else, or and they did, and then those are the kids that actually started skateboarding. So it's almost like the same type of thing, but then converted into a new form of surfing, right? Then we had, a few different people that had this in their records that they were a part of this and actually lived around the area. And I'm not that far from Montauk. Not really close, but not really that far. I could drive there. So, not long ago, I had a dream. I had a dream that was one of those lucid dreams, which is a recall. And, when people have a lucid dream, I mean, it's very, very real. I know that there is controversy over that. People in the community, they understand it. You can have a vision of like a memory and a deja vu or something where you're just saying, oh, I remember that. I remember that in detail, and I know who did this, that, and the other thing. And in this case, I had a dream that I was amongst a bunch of surfers and I saw myself. I was probably, I want to say between the age of 18. I was pretty young, between the age of 18 and 20. I could have even been 16. I'm not really sure. All I know is I had long brown hair, which I did when I was younger, and I was living in this house, and there were many people living in that house that were surfers, and we were working for a company. And what I recall is that, we all kind of had like our own bedroom. We're, you know, kind of like a community kitchen, that sort of thing. And I had this boyfriend, And then I remember that that boyfriend looked very similar to the one that I talked about, who I saw literally. I had a vision where there was a surfer coming, like jumping in to my home through the screen. It was very, very bizarre, but you'll see that in the other video. And in this recall, I actually see that I was in a relationship with him and we were talking by the door and somebody knocked on the door. And then there was an older woman there and she asked to speak with him. He went outside and he never came back in again. And so my thoughts at that time was that she was his handler and that there was nothing I could say or do about it. I remember that there was a lot of other people, there was a lot of activity. So, the next scene that I recall is that I'm sitting in this large, is like an auditorium of some sort, and there were all these seats. There was carpeting on the floor. There was no pattern, like distinctive pattern on the floor. And in the front, there was a place where there was a speaker. It looked like some kind of corporate sponsorship. And so I was seated in the front. I remember the way I sat down is kind of the way I do sit very often. I was on the chair and I had one leg up and sort of looking around. I was pretty relaxed. It almost looked like, I had washed my hair and just let it dry. I didn't fix it. And, we were kind of in sort of, I don't know, beach clothing, I'd say, kind of the way surfers dress. And so me and everyone else in the house was there except for that boyfriend that I had. And we were just sitting there and they were going over some announcements. And I felt like I had won some kind of award for something. But I was alone, as far as like, I had my boyfriend, but the seat was empty on either side. And so it was important to me, but not that important. It was more important. I felt like that I loved the sport. I loved surfing. And then I gazed over and I saw that the sponsorship was Hurley. And so I thought, this is strange. This is getting to be too real for me. I like, definitely was in that situation. So we were told that we were pulled into Montauk and that Montauk, I believe, has gotten into many other different situations. And of course, there are these different corporations that are involved. Let's take a look at Hurley. Now, if someone say, well, who were you then? If you got an award, you were recognized. Um, I don't feel like I was anyone really famous. I felt like I was a female there and maybe an up and coming surfer or just someone that, like, I said, kind of excelled, but did it because I really loved it. I didn't see any support system. I didn't see any family around, what we were doing, and I felt like they were friends. Oh, there was a last part to this. After the award ceremony, or whatever that business meeting was, or promotion that they were trying to do, or collaboration, I remember being back at the house and waking up, and then the house being empty. All of the other surfers had left. And it's like, when you go hang out at the beach for the day, you're really tired. So I think it was kind of like that. I'd gone to the beach, maybe came home, took a shower, laid down, slept for a little while, woke up, and all of the other surfers were gone. And there was a woman that came into the room and she said to me, everyone else left. You need to leave. I said, where did they go? And she didn't tell me. So I don't know where they were taken or I was separated or something else happened. But I did talk to Peter about it. He did validate it. And, Usually I don't talk about these type of things unless it's very real to me, but I do know that this was part of the experimentation that they do. It didn't necessarily have to be in this timeline, in this reality. I did do a search to try to see if I could find myself here, but I couldn't. It just didn't feel right. But as you can see, this is a very big company, and it was founded in 1979. And to be honest with you, it did not seem like it was 2026. It did feel like it was in the 70s, which would more matched how old I would have been at that time. And they started off these people, Joe, no one's child, as the Hurley Surfboards International partner, Bob Rowland. I guess they were surfboard shapers. Company was sold to Nike, and then Bob Hurley assumed the interim CEO role of Hurley International, replacing Michael Egek, who had decided to leave the company, and Hurley stepped down as the CEO in 2015 and was replaced by Bob Coombs. Nike Incorporated appointed John Schweitzer as CEO and the CFO of the Hurley brand. Nike announced the sale of Hurley to Blue Star Alliance LLC for an undisclosed amount. And the surf publication Beach Grit reported that Hurley would not renew the contracts of professional surfers, its sponsors. On the 23rd of January 2020, Conquest Sports, a licensee of the Converse brand in Australia and New Zealand, announced a joint venture partnership with Blue Star Alliance to distribute the Hurley brand in Australia and New Zealand, and the Hurley brand trades under the company Hurley Australasia. Hurley then launched its first Australian-focused site. So let's take a look at Blue Star Alliance, which literally sounds like a space program. The firm was founded in 2007 by Joseph Gabby and Ralph Gindy. And we're talking about everything. Look at it's almost like they were the BlackRock here. They're picked up Off-White, Palm Angels, Dickies, Scotch and Soda, Hurley, Justice, Baby, Ellie, Tahari, Limited 2, and Brookstone. Okay, so after looking at the name that the acquisition of Hurley was taken in by a company named Blue Star Alliance, it made me think of the Blue Star Kachina, which is a part of the Hopi prophecy, and which represents the final ninth sign of the coming day of purification, often interpreted as a world transforming cataclysm. And so now I'm wondering, like what is the connection with the surfers? And now we're looking at this a company that's taking in a large group of companies related to clothing. And also there's, specific type of clothing that were created for surfers that would be useful in space in the future that seem to dry very quickly, are functional, they could stretch, they're more realistic for that type of physical activity, yet also keeping the body dry, over any length of time. Here are some of the key aspects of the prophecy. The sign, the blue star Kachina, will appear in the sky, signifying the end of the world and beginning of a new one. The event is often described as a dwelling place in the heavens that crashes to the earth. And then there's a prediction of that foretells chaos, including a fall of high leaders, a breakdown in social order, and the end of the Hopi ceremonies. And the context is, according to Wikipedia, this prophecy is linked to the Hopi concept of the day of purification, which is often interpreted as an apocalyptic event that cleanses the world. Well, I saw it as like, not a physical prison, as they say here, but, energetically, somehow being caught in these programs And when I say it's not by the space program that's doing it, but the corporation's doing this, and sort of like I was in this house where we were being controlled or handled, and then here I am by myself, and then being sent away. So, some form of chaos, people being pulled away, not really making any sense. The other thing that came up, here's a picture of Hurley, and if you remember the show Lost, that too was a corporation, and there's the symbol of Dharma, but it's also called Swan. So then it made me think Swan was also involved with Montauk, and the character here is named Hurley. So we're getting another segment, another breadcrumb of all of this. So many people think that, well, we're talking about something very serious. This is Montauk. These are soldiers. These are people that went through a whole lot of difficulty. These are people that were a part of an experiment. You're making light of it by talking about surfers. And while I was searching, I found this clip from Apocalypse Now, and it's the surfing scene. And it's a similar thing. It's this surfing or this mode of going into the water. Remember, all of our technology that we have is underneath in the water. All our communication, these big cables, everything is there. And there's a lot of unknown information. There's a huge void of information in the ocean of what is there, what isn't underneath us. And well, it's what's underneath, even these dumbs that we're talking about in many of the shows. But take a look at this. I mean, this is just crazy. They're, out there, and there's this crazy military captain, or I don't know what his rank is, but here he is talking about going surfing right in the middle of everything that's happening, and he's checking out the waves. And he's telling them, this is how we're going to manage it. And then of course, he has that famous line, "I love the smell of napalm in the morning." And then that frenetic craziness of what is actually happening. What is happening here? And it's kind of like that moment where you don't really know what to do. You're just trying to break away from the insanity and the trauma, and you get into the ocean and just try to have some kind of other experience. And so he is refusing to acknowledge that this is a problem here. The Vietnam War was an experiment. It was a problem. And yet this is what happens is they're going through this whole thing, and they're surfing. So this is how I'm going to end it. I want you to think about this. And not that surfing is Montauk, but surfing is something that is a part of what had happened. And why am I having these dreams, these memories? Why was I trapped in that house? What house was that had all of these people in it? What happened to all those people? And, when are we going to stop these experiments that seem to continue and progress? We'd like to see it all end, actually. And this movie came out in 1979. This is probably the time that I had my dream where I had that recall. It was around the 70s, by the way that I was dressed and the way everyone else was dressed, even though I had it now, but the recall just came back. And this was an unexplained war, and it's come up many times in our sessions. We talk about Vietnam. It's almost like this strange reality, a pocket reality, a war that didn't make any sense. Simultaneously, there's drug issues that further distort everything. And, not to make light of it, but we have so many veterans, and so many super soldiers that are still suffering and still struggling. So the question is to find answers, to find a resolve, to feel a little bit more in control of what might have happened to us, what might have happened to those that were in some of these wars that were clearly experimental, what might have happened to many people regarding MK Ultra, what might have happened to people in Montauk in some of these time travel experiments. And oh, another example, Back to the Future. You see Michael J. Fox on a surfboard or a skateboard that levitates. And it's the same thing all over again. And I don't necessarily agree that this has to be our reality, but once we release from these corporations, that can alter and change many things around us. And I know the elite do not want that to happen. They have it on their calendar. They think it's set in stone. Nothing is set in stone. If we are the ones that are creating this node or something that's holding everything in place because we're trapped somewhere, because we're spinning in a loop somewhere, then let's get out of those loops and let's not be contributing to the problem. The only way we can get out of these loops is if we come to terms with who we are, what we've been doing, and not being afraid of what had already happened in the past, what corporations that we were trapped by, what kind of struggles we went through. We don't need to go through the muck of the trauma, the waterboarding, and the terrible torment that we might have gone through. We don't have to wade through all of that. It's very, very dark. But we can say, moving forward, enough is enough. I'm leaving. And it's not leaving the space program. As a soldier and a protector is always a protector for the good. But for the bad, we don't have to contribute. And so we need to realign ourselves in a way to change those timelines. So, with that said, thank you for listening.